you devote over a decade of your life organizing India's chaotic hospitality market, only to spend 28 days in a jail cell over an unpaid bill just weeks after your company goes bankrupt. A company which you had once scaled to over 50,000 properties across 4,500 towns. This is the story of a pioneer that conquered the map but lost the ground beneath its feet. Its name, Stayzilla. Welcome back to The Flop Side, the podcast where we uncover the stories of Indian startups that once soared only to come crashing down. I'm your host Priyanka, and last week we explored the digital bloat of Hike, a company that suffocated by trying to dominate India's smartphones. Today, we are stepping away from the screen to what used to be one of the most chaotic, fragmented, and unorganized markets of the country, the hospitality sector. This episode unpacks the story of a startup that bypassed the polished lobbies of the big city hotel chains, choosing instead to map the invisible, affordable beds scattered across the deep, remote pockets of incredible India. We are talking about Stayzilla. They were one of India's earliest bets in the alternative accommodation space. They survived the grueling, unglamorous trenches of bootstrapping to actually achieve profitability. But the physical world is stubbornly unforgiving. In this episode, we'll explore the fatal difference between aggregating supply and actually controlling it. This is the riches to rags story of how a disciplined, profitable business morphed into a cash-burning machine.
Act 1. The Spark.
This time, we're winding the clock back to 2005. If you lived through it, you know the internet wasn't just a background utility yet. It was a whole process. Getting online meant enduring the mechanical screech of a dial-up modem, followed by a silent prayer that the landline wouldn't ring and kill your connection. Once you miraculously made it to the other side, the web was driven by two simple impulses: curiosity and connection. We spent our limited bandwidth firing off buzzes on Yahoo Messenger, agonizing over Orkut scraps, or frantically copy-pasting research for a school assignment before the phone line was reclaimed. The internet was still a novelty, an entertaining distraction rather than the backbone of our routines. If you wanted to get anything tangible done, like booking a train ticket or paying utility bills, you would have to physically go and stand in a queue with a wallet full of cash. In that world, the mere suggestion of typing your actual debit card details into a browser wasn't just a leap of faith. It was considered madness. The reason I'm painting such a vivid picture for you is because it was exactly in this analog, tech-weary climate that three young founders, 𝗧𝗵𝗲, his future wife Rupal Surana, and their college mate 𝗧𝗵𝗲, decided to launch an online travel agency called Inasra Technologies. Back then, booking a stay meant blindly trusting a travel agent with a massive Yellow Pages directory. If you wanted to travel outside major metropolitan hubs and explore a quaint town in the countryside, you were stuck. You either had expensive legacy hotel chains completely out of reach for a budget traveler, or thousands of local guest houses and lodges that were completely invisible. They had no websites, no digital presence, and no standardized booking systems. And of course, there was no Google Maps for a quick hotels near me search. You just had to show up and hope for the best. There was huge supply-side fragmentation coupled with little to no demand-side accessibility. With 𝗍𝗗, the founding trio had hoped to try and fix that. Now, I want to pause here and emphasize something critical. They did not immediately go out and raise millions of dollars to subsidize growth. The Indian startup ecosystem, as we know it today, practically didn't exist. There were no mega rounds of funding, no unicorn clubs, and certainly no playbooks for building an internet company. So armed with only their personal savings, they operated with absolute financial discipline, wearing multiple hats, keeping overhead practically non-existent, and focusing relentlessly on the gravely underserved market. And it was actually working. By early 2008, even though the Indian online travel market had turned into an absolute battlefield, 𝗍𝗗 was quietly gaining traction. Make My Trip had recently shifted its focus from its USA operations to the domestic market, triggering a race for the top with other upstarts like Yatra and ClearTrip. But these massive platforms all shared a glaring blind spot. They were entirely fixated on air ticketing and premium hotels. Meanwhile, 𝗍𝗗 was targeting the neglected, unorganized sector of budget stays and had stitched together a strong network across 250 towns in Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. But along with that momentum came a major operational challenge. Budget hotels back then weren't exactly digitally savvy, meaning real-time inventory of rooms was a myth. Because of this, 𝗍𝗗 was hitting a wall. Only 45% of their bookings were outright confirmed. This meant the very real possibility that customers would pay for a stay only to have the booking fall through due to unavailable rooms. This created a disastrous user experience. The current playbook was broken, and they knew it. So promptly acknowledging the leaky faucet, they engineered a technical fix. They shifted from being a simple booking gateway to a data-driven operation, building software to collate room info, track availability trends, and actually predict what users wanted. It was a complete game changer. By 2009, outright website confirmations shot up from the dismal 45% to a solid 75%. Their underlying engine was finally humming, but there was still something missing. The packaging was all wrong. Let's be honest, 𝗍𝗗 lacked punch. It had zero recall value. So in 2010, the company underwent a strategic metamorphosis. They needed a name that reflected their grassroots mission of reaching the deepest, most remote districts, the Zillas of India, while simultaneously signaling their massive ambition. The result was Stayzilla. With the tech sorted out and a formidable new brand identity, the startup was no longer just a regional player. It was officially positioned to become the undisputed monster of the budget accommodation market.
Act 2. The Illusion.
By 2011, Stayzilla had achieved operational profitability. Excluding advertising, they were reportedly generating 1.68 crore rupees in revenue, against a remarkably lean expense sheet of just 18.5 lakhs. They had positive unit economics. The venture capital world finally took notice. In 2012, after 7 long years, Stayzilla secured its very first funding. The Indian Angel Network had injected 2.5 crores in the startup. Realizing they had the tiger by the tail, the team could finally loosen the purse strings to expand their reach. When asked about it, Yogendra commented,
"Currently, Stayzilla has 4,000 hotels listed on the site from 600 cities across India. In 6 months, we plan to increase this number to 900 cities. We are adding hotels at an aggressive pace."
As 2014 rolled up, the global tech landscape was undergoing a massive rewiring, courtesy of the sharing economy, which is basically the monetization of spare assets. The concept itself wasn't novel. In the Indian context, families had been taking in boarders and paying guests for generations. The actual disruption was the network. Technology suddenly provided the formal architecture and verifiable trust required to take these scattered handshake transactions and scale them nationwide. Companies like Ola were already proving this by corralling independent drivers into a massive on-demand fleet. Similarly, halfway across the world, in America, Airbnb was proving the model worked just as effectively for real estate, convincing travelers that booking a stranger's bedroom online was both safe and convenient. With that shift, Stayzilla looked at their own data and realized they were sitting on a goldmine. There was a tremendous volume of opportunity for alternative accommodations like peer-to-peer lodging and homestays. At the start of 2014, only 5% of Stayzilla's 5,000-room catalog was alternative accommodation. Over the year, that number steeply rose to 36% of 22,000 rooms. Their pivot was deeply strategic. The commissions on alternative stays were incredibly lucrative, reportedly commanding nearly double of standard hotel bookings. But more importantly, this pivot armed them with a distinct narrative to fend off a rising threat in the market, a young startup called Oyo Rooms. But while Oyo was busy franchising budget hotels and standardizing bedsheets and Wi-Fi, Stayzilla pitched itself as the ultimate marketplace aggregator. They weren't trying to control the properties. They were simply offering access to infinite, authentic variety. It was effective because in February 2015, the VC vaults unlocked. Nexus Venture Partners and Matrix Partners poured around 124 crores into Stayzilla for their Series B. This funding brought about a significant change to Stayzilla. You see, for the first 7 years, they had built their foundation without the crushing pressure of a VC's ticking clock. But in the startup world, a solid foundation is rarely enough to satisfy the appetite of big-ticket investors. They didn't just want a profitable regional player anymore. They wanted an empire. So the targets they set were nothing short of astronomical. The hypergrowth engine was officially turned on, and Stayzilla went on a spending spree that completely abandoned the financial discipline of their bootstrapping years. They exploded their geographic footprint, eventually pushing into 4,500 towns and listing 50,000 properties that ranged from a 300 rupees a night village hut to a 70,000 rupees a night luxury villa. While all these big numbers sound really impressive, securing the supply was only half the battle. The real victory lay in turning that massive footprint into actual transacting revenue. Now, this is where Stayzilla's spectacular rise takes a dark turn. Because to acquire customers fast enough, they deployed the deadliest weapon in the startup arsenal: catastrophic discounting. Stayzilla began offering 30 to 50% discounts just to stimulate demand. They were essentially giving away their revenue to onboard customers. The illusion of scale was magnificent, but the unit economics, they were telling an entirely different story.
Act 3. The Crack.
To understand the effects of deep discounting, let's look at the financial reality of the 2016 fiscal year, because the numbers are astounding. Stayzilla's revenue had tripled to 13.8 crore. Now that sounds great until you look at how much that revenue cost. Their marketing spend had hit the roof at 56 crores, more than 4 times their revenue. The irony is that for a startup that clawed its way to early profits on personal savings and a non-existent marketing budget, they were bleeding out on the operating table, posting a devastating loss of 94.5 crores. The customer acquisition cost was completely divorced from the lifetime value of the user. In business terms, lifetime value is the total revenue you can realistically expect from a single customer over the course of their relationship with your brand. The golden rule is that this lifetime value must eventually outweigh the money you spent to acquire them in the first place. But Stayzilla was paying a substantial premium to acquire budget travelers who were only loyal to the lowest price, not the platform. The cost to get a user in the door was infinitely higher than the tiny cut Stayzilla made on that one booking. Their discount-heavy strategy artificially inflated demand without establishing sustainable customer acquisition channels. While the financial metrics were raising alarms in the boardroom, the real cracks were appearing on the ground. When you scale an offline marketplace to 4,500 towns at breakneck speed, the operational infrastructure eventually snaps. Because they were trying to grow so fast, they were onboarding properties without physical verification or on-ground inspection. There was no quality standardization. They were relying on property owners in remote Tier 3 towns, many of whom lacked the capability to manage live digital inventory. The consequences were disastrous. Q2, the infamous 2016 incident, where a traveler from Mumbai booked a Stayzilla homestay in 𝗧𝗵𝗲, Meghalaya. After traveling all the way across the country, the customer arrived at the address only to discover that the property literally did not exist. When she called Stayzilla for help, the customer support infrastructure was completely unequipped to resolve it. The horror story hit social media, severely damaging the brand's trust and image. What's worse, this wasn't an isolated event. The bad experiences and bad reviews had been piling up, with customers very vocally proclaiming the company a fraud. Their plight didn't end here. Around the same time, the competitive landscape turned vicious. Ritesh Agarwal's Oyo Rooms had raised massive capital from SoftBank and was aggressively locking down the budget hotel supply with exclusive franchise agreements. Where Stayzilla offered a chaotic assortment, Oyo offered predictable, standardized comfort. And if that wasn't enough, Airbnb, the global titan itself, began aggressively expanding in India, identifying it as one of the biggest growth markets. Airbnb brought a superior technology platform, global brand trust, and a massive war chest to the table. Caught between a collapsing backend and two heavily armed rivals, Stayzilla was backed into a corner. But in October 2016, it seemed like things were taking a turn, as they managed to raise approximately 90 crores from their existing investors, Matrix and Nexus. However, that was just a drop in the ocean. The burn rate was simply too high. Despite the fresh capital, just 5 months later, the runway vanished and Stayzilla was out of time.
Act 4. The Fade.
Now, investors, spooked by high cash burn and a lack of profitability across the industry, suddenly tightened their purse strings. Unable to raise any more funding in a hostile market, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 announced in a blog that Stayzilla was officially suspending operations in Feb 2017, as he said.
The initial 7 years were all about having negative working capital, positive cash flow, and sustained ability to fund our own growth. Those were the only metrics we tracked. In the last 3-4 years, though, I can honestly state that somewhere I lost my path. I started treasuring GMV, room nights, and other vanity metrics instead of the fundamentals of cash flow and working capital.
Overnight, hundreds of employees were laid off. 50,000 listings were pulled offline, and branch offices were shuttered. But the nightmare had just begun. When a company shuts down that rapidly, the fallout is chaotic. Vendor payables had piled up, including a massive 1.7 crore bill owed to a Chennai-based advertising agency named 𝗧𝗵𝗲. And 𝗧𝗵𝗲 wasn't willing to wait in the civil bankruptcy line. On March 13, 2017, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 leveraged local authorities, filing criminal charges of cheating against 𝗧𝗵𝗲. The next day, he was arrested on the street, denied the right to call his family or a lawyer, and thrown into judicial custody for nearly a month. A commercial payment failure had been weaponized into a criminal fraud charge. The Indian tech ecosystem erupted. Prominent founders and investors published open letters, horrified that a failed business venture could result in jail time. They argued this would create a terrifying, chilling effect on entrepreneurship in the country. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 was eventually granted conditional bail on April 11th, but the damage was irreversible. Stayzilla wasn't just dead, it had become a highly publicized cautionary tale. So what can we learn from the tremendous 12-year journey of the Godzilla of homestays? The first lesson I want to get into is about the mirage of the marketplace model. As an aggregator, Stayzilla didn't have to lease buildings or hire a cleanup crew. They just had to build the platform. But in an emerging market like India, where quality standards are wildly inconsistent, pure aggregation is incredibly risky. When you compare Stayzilla's collapse to 𝗧𝗵𝗲's survival, the contrast is stark. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 ran a franchise model. They signed exclusive agreements. They standardized the rooms, they controlled the pricing, and they guaranteed a specific guest experience. Yes, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 burned massive amounts of capital, arguably more than Stayzilla, but they used that capital to build brand equity and customer loyalty. When a guest booked an 𝗧𝗵𝗲, they knew exactly what they were getting at. But when a guest booked at Stayzilla, they were rolling the dice. So Stayzilla learned the hard way that in the hospitality business, if you do not control the quality of the supply, you will eventually lose the trust of the demand. But perhaps the most damning takeaway would be the inherent toxicity of a growth at all costs mindset. The moment institutional capital flooded the boardroom, the mandate shifted from building a resilient business to manufacturing an empire overnight. Chasing impossibly steep targets, the company resorted to artificial levers like predatory discounting and exorbitant marketing campaigns, which, as we saw earlier, didn't result in acquiring a loyal user base. Yogendra himself claimed that they began optimizing entirely for vanity metrics, treating gross merchandise value as the ultimate metric for success, completely ignoring the hollow foundation it rested upon. This GMV only measured the total volume of money changing hands on Stayzilla, not the actual revenue they were earning. So while they were processing millions, it eventually came down to the meager commission, which was barely a fraction of how much they were spending. By prioritizing raw market share over sustainable unit economics, Stayzilla burned through its runway before it could ever figure out how to be profitable at scale. And perhaps that is the true tragedy of this story. This was a founding team that fundamentally knew how to survive. They built their original foundation on pure grit and a relentless focus on the bottom line. But the moment they traded that strict discipline for the intoxicating promise of hypergrowth, they lost the very DNA that made them successful in the first place. Which leaves us with the question to ponder. As you scale your own ambitions, whether it's a business, a career, or a creative project, how do you make sure the relentless pursuit of the next big milestone doesn't completely erase the vision that got you started? And that's your stay for the week. No bad reviews, just a full booking of lessons. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next on the flop side. But before we check out, here's one last thing to tuck under your pillow. The oldest hotel in the world has been running continuously since 705 AD. It's a traditional hot spring inn known as ryokan in Japan, called 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and it's been passed down through the same family for 52 generations. Now, if you've got an interesting take on anything to do with the startup world or a pitch deck you want us to dissect, find us on Instagram at @theflopside.podcast. I'm your host Priyanka, and I'm here with my co-creator Nandita. Thanks for hanging out with us this week on The Flop Side, where we show you the flip side of flop startups.